Light did not reach this deep, not in the way it touched the surface world. Down here, a different kind of illumination stirred, older, colder, alive in ways the human mind struggled to pass. The submersible's hull groaned under pressure, ancient and absolute, metal skin trembling as if in awe. Its floodlights pushed forward like trembling fingers through molasses dark water, revealing bursts of bioluminescence that flared and vanished like nervous laughter. Elena Vostrikov, expedition commander and the last surviving descendant of a Cold War geneticist turned dissident mythologist, gripped the console rail as if anchoring herself against the weight of inheritance. She was 42, with eyes that remembered more than they witnessed, and a mind trained to search not just for data, but for patterns in madness. The ocean floor yawned open ahead, not flat, not sedimented, but fractured like a shattered mirror descending into a rift no satellite had ever mapped. They called it the mouth, and its presence had corrupted sonar and logic for decades. Until now, no one had dared to descend. The silence within the sub wasn't absence, it was loaded, humming with suppressed breath, slow beeps, the restless shiver of machinery built to simulate control in an uncontrollable abyss. Beside Elena, Dr. Maro Ikeda whispered a Shinto prayer beneath his breath, not out of faith, but habit, a ritual of survival. His hands danced over the touchscreen as the oxygen recycling system coughed once, then steadied. "We're entering the inner trench," he murmured, eyes flickering. "The pressure's past spec. Seismics are off, like the rift is moving, slowly breathing." Eleanor didn't answer. Her thoughts clawed back to the decoded records, to her grandfather's scribbled pages, illustrations of human silhouettes with coral spines and pearl eyes, handwritten notes referring to the inheritance of depth, the anti-time currents, and a repeated phrase in Russian. "We came from the water to remember the stars." A thud reverberated, dull and wrong. Something had brushed the sub, not a creature, no, it was more like the water itself flexing as if reacting. The lights dimmed, flared, and then steadied again. Eleanor turned the exterior cameras slowly. In the distance, behind drifting clouds of marine snow, the rift pulsed open like an eye, ringed with structures that didn't belong. They weren't geological, they were grown, enormous reef-like towers that curved inward in impossible geometries, spiraling around a central spire that seemed to pulse with slow amber light. Not alien, not entirely. Organic, yes, but disturbingly symmetrical, like a cathedral sculpted from bone and time. No one spoke. Not even Maro. The realization weighed on them like the water above. This wasn't the bottom of Earth. This was the threshold of something older than Earth. Something that remembered when the stars were young. The sub continued downward, drawn not by thrust, but something deeper, a slow gravitational lure that bypassed mass and appealed to intent. Elena's skin crawled. Her dreams the night before, seas of ink where dead ancestors swam backward in time, came screaming into the now. The light from the cathedral flickered again, and then flared outward in tendrils, probing. The AI systems shuddered. Words appeared unbidden across the console. "Welcome back." Maro stared at the text. "We're being recognized?" he said. Not scanned, not targeted, greeted. Eleanor inhaled sharply. Her eyes were fixed on the central spire, where shapes began to emerge. Humanoid, fluid, yet not drifting. Walking. On seabed, toward them. Their silhouettes gleamed with metallic carapaces that refracted the floodlights into fractal illusions. No propulsion, no fins. They walked as if gravity obeyed them differently. "Cut propulsion," Eleanor ordered. "We go passive." Morrow hesitated but obeyed. The sub coasted, silent now. One of the figures approached, stopping just short of the viewport. It didn't knock, it simply stared. And Elena felt something bloom behind her eyes. Not a thought, but an imprint. A memory that wasn't hers. Cold water, infinite and maternal. The crushing joy of abandonment. A voice without language that said, "We made you to leave us." "But you remembered," she gasped, grabbing her temple. Blood trickled from her nose. "They're communicating," she whispered. "Through memory, not just mine. Genetic, deep encoded. Human ancestral recall. This place isn't alien, it's ours." The being drifted backward and gestured. Not a wave, not an invitation, a summons. The trench opened further, revealing what looked like a vertical shaft ringed with glyphs etched in calcium and gold. The AI chirped again. "Biosignature confirmed. Entry permitted." Morrow looked at her. "What the hell is this, Elena?" She met his eyes, and for a flicker of a second her irises gleamed with an unnatural bioluminescence. "I think it's home. Or maybe it's what we buried when we left." The shaft welcomed them like a throat. They descended slowly, unresisting. The walls narrowed, then widened. The water around them shimmered as if rippling through time, not space. Shapes began to coalesce, murals etched into coral, showing primates kneeling before oceanic titans, holding flame in defiance. Others depicted war, not of species but of time, like loops battling linearity, symbols of clocks melting into tidal spirals. Then, silence again. Total blackout, lights gone, systems frozen. A heartbeat passed, another, then a flicker, and the interior lights came back dim and red. Emergency mode. Eleanor and Morrow looked around. They weren't alone in the sub. A third figure stood behind them, silent, not corporeal. A haze in the shape of a man. No face, no features, only eyes, deep and unblinking, like polished obsidian reflecting ancient seas. "Do you remember why you ran?" it whispered. Its voice came not through the speakers, but inside them, layered, impossible. Elena's mouth trembled. She tried to speak, but words were inadequate. She nodded instead. "We were afraid of ourselves," she whispered. The entity inclined its head. "Then perhaps you are ready. But you must choose to remember what you are, or to remain human." Outside, the trench walls began to ripple like a membrane. The cathedral dissolved into spiraling structures of flowing light. They had passed through something, or perhaps something had passed into them, and in that moment, far above, a satellite feed blinked out. The world topside would not hear from that abyssal echo again, not in the way they expected, not in the language they trusted, but the sea remembered. And so now did humanity. The pressure no longer registered on any known scale. The hull should have imploded long ago, but the laws governing their descent had begun to rewrite themselves. Time flowed oddly, like warm syrup, spiraling backward at the edges, thoughts misfiring out of sequence. Maro Ikeda kept seeing his daughter's face at age 6, then age 12, then never born. He gripped the railing with white knuckles, breath shallow, anchoring himself to the moment, to the reality that Eleanor still sat across from him, silent, eyes fixed forward, as if entranced by something just beyond the glass. Her pupils had dilated into abyssal black, irises flickering with unnatural colour. Not reflections, signals. The trench had become a tunnel of shifting substance, no longer water, no longer anything describable. They had passed the veil, and now reality hummed like an unstable chord stretched between frequencies. Outside, geometries rearranged with disobedient angles, ancient, fractal, unspeakably beautiful. Fluid structures formed and deformed, whale-sized obelisks gliding sideways, spirals rotating on axes of thought rather than space, organisms of light and memory. Every time Maro blinked, he saw something new. Every time he tried to focus, it slipped just outside the conceptual grasp of human cognition. He muttered to himself, "Nothing is constant except us." It was a weak mantra, but it kept him sane. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice lower as if filtered through water. "Do you feel it?" she said. "Something underneath language, like grief that never belonged to us." Maro nodded slowly, like being born backward. She didn't smile. There was no room for irony anymore, only recognition. Outside the viewport, a structure resolved, no longer coral, no longer mineral. A city, or what passed for one, not built but grown, like a symbiotic memory of civilization etched into a species-wide unconscious. Towers pulsed with organic light, each beat echoing the rhythm of a colossal heart. Bridges twisted in recursive loops that shimmered with glyphs, alive with intent. And within the city's centre stood a spire, identical to the one above, but larger, awake. As they approached, the sub began to dissolve, not physically but ideologically. The dashboard softened, metal lost its hardness, symbols reformed into runes neither of them could read, but both understood. A decision was being prepared. Eleanor stood, the air around her shimmering as if she were underwater now, hair floating, limbs graceful. She placed a hand against the viewport. "We have been remembered," she said. "Now they want to see if we remember them." A soundless pulse emanated from the spire. The walls of the sub flared white. When the light faded, they stood not in a machine, but on a platform of warm stone beneath a dark sky that pulsed like the ocean's ceiling. They were breathing without tanks, moving without resistance. Gravity returned but gentler, cradling them. Maro looked at his hands. Tiny flecks of bioluminescent script crawled beneath his skin like glowing veins. Eleanor exhaled. "This isn't hallucination, it's invitation." Figures emerged, tall, fluid, humanoid, but wrong in the way dreams are wrong. They bore resemblance to humans, yet carried age like a scent. Their eyes were smooth obsidian, their skin translucent as jellyfish, bone structures flickering beneath like carved crystal, and behind their eyes was recognition, not observation. Recognition. One stepped forward, towering and silent, then opened its mouth, not to speak, but to show. A sphere of memory enveloped them, flashes of ancient primates kneeling on shores lit by auroras not of Earth. Humanoids diving into black water, then resurfacing changed. DNA rewritten by intention. A pact. A seed planted in the species, not technology, but a longing. A recursive urge to return. Elena staggered, tears leaking down her cheeks. "We're not Earth's children," she gasped. "We're its inheritors, but we were born elsewhere, birthed in ocean to forget the stars. They gave us forgetfulness to protect us from what we left behind." The being placed its hand over Elena's chest. Her breath caught. Visions poured in. Not images, but sensations. The immensity of time. Civilizations built from resonance and myth. Wars fought not over land, but memory. Species extinguished by the return of truth. The humans were an experiment, a hope, not superior, but uniquely resilient. Their fragility, their short lifespans, their pain, it had made them immune to certain forms of extinction. The being withdrew its hand. Eleanor gasped, staggered, then knelt. Maro looked up at the horizon. Above the spire, the sky shimmered and something impossibly large began to surface from behind it, a shape so massive it bent perception. Not a ship, a presence, like a cathedral made of black coral and pulsar light, drifting forward through the concept of space. As it moved, the city around them reacted, towers vibrating, lights flickering in synchronized welcome. The being spoke now, voice inside their bones. "You carry the last echo, the final encryption. You have a choice. Remain as you are or awaken the seed, but you cannot return both ways." Elena rose, her voice steady now. "And if we awaken?" The being's head tilted. "You become custodians of the deep code. The ocean will no longer be your unknown. It will be your weapon, your home, your history. You will not age as you once did, but neither will you be fully human again." Maro stared at Elena and something cracked in him. "And if we go back?" he asked, voice breaking. The being paused. "You will forget, again. But this time humanity will forget you. The choice is not yours alone. Your blood speaks. It already has." Elena's arm glowed. Her veins shimmered with spirals of light. She looked at Maro, not with persuasion, but apology. "I think I already said yes," she whispered. The spire behind them began to thrum with acceleration. A corridor opened, not in space but in sense, a vortex of concepts: home, death, godhood, return. The memory of humanity watched itself from the brink, and the deep sea pulsed, waiting to reclaim what it had once hidden in flesh. The corridor closed behind him like a mouth, silent and unforgiving. Maro fell, not physically but spiritually, through layers of subtraction. With each breath, names slipped from memory. With each heartbeat, faces unraveled. The memory of Elena became fragmented, then impressionistic, then a smear of warmth with no origin. He screamed into the narrowing dark, But even his own voice sounded borrowed. The forgetting was not violent, it was kind. It dulled pain, smoothed edges, offered sedation, and still something in him fought it. The descent ended without warning. One moment he was immersed in unbeing, the next he was surfacing, vomiting water and light into his lungs, coughing on the taste of salt and absence. A floodlight blinded him. Mechanical arms seized his shoulders. He was dragged across wet steel. Voices shouted in clipped commands, blurred and unfamiliar. The surface, a submersible vessel, human-built, cold, loud, smelling of rust and oil and fear. He blacked out. When he woke, the lights were sterile. White walls, electrodes on his temples. A pulse monitor beeped in the corner. Across from him sat a man in a grey naval uniform, skin creased like folded maps, eyes sharp and empty. "You were found drifting 20 miles west of the dive point," the man said without preamble. "No suit, no oxygen tank, no vessel, nothing." He tapped a tablet with a gloved finger. "No record of descent, no mission log. According to our files, you've been missing for 4 years." Morrow blinked. His mouth opened, closed. The words weren't there, just the shadows of them, a shape, a pressure. His voice cracked. "There was someone else." The man's brow furrowed slightly. "Who?" Morrow hesitated. A name balanced on the edge of his thoughts. Elena. But it felt like fiction, a dream retold too often, frayed at the edges. He shook his head. "I don't know." The man studied him for a long moment, then leaned forward. "You were part of Project Deluge, classified dive initiative. Records were wiped after the loss of the crew. Tell me, Morrow, do you remember what was down there?" Morrow turned to the small porthole beside the bed. The sea outside looked normal, sunlight scattering across gentle waves. A lie, a surface. He stared for a long time before answering. Nothing. There was nothing. It was the only truth he was allowed to remember. The man didn't press. He stood, scribbled something on the tablet, and exited. Morrow remained, watching the light ripple against the glass, like a heartbeat, barely remembered. Weeks passed, or maybe days. Time had become uncertain. He was transferred to a coastal medical facility, government-funded, silent as a mausoleum. He underwent cognitive tests, MRI scans, polygraph interviews. Psychiatrists poked gently at his mind, hoping to draw out patterns from the fog. But Morrow spoke only of silence, of black water, of waking up alone. They declared him damaged but non-threatening. Eventually they released him into obscurity with a generous but carefully conditioned discharge packet. He was told to reintegrate. He moved inland, found work fixing boat motors in a forgotten marina that smelled of algae and gasoline. The days passed. The sea was always in the distance, calling, taunting, familiar. Yet something else haunted him more, the absence of grief. He knew he had lost something sacred, something vast, but the shape of it was gone. The pain remained without a source, a phantom limb of the soul. Then the dreams began. At first they were fragments, wet stone, distant singing, eyes like obsidian orbs watching from the deep. Then they became sharper. He saw her, Eleanor, but not as she was. She had changed, taller, gliding rather than walking, her voice layered with resonance. She stood beneath a living spire and spoke his name, not as a summons but as a farewell. He would wake in a sweat, heart pounding, chest aching like it had been hollowed out. Each time he tried to remember more, the image slipped further away. He scribbled sketches in a notebook, spiral cities, symbols of light, creatures of transparency and bone. It looked like madness. It felt like scripture. Years passed. The world moved on, but rumors did not die. Fishermen in the Pacific spoke of strange lights far below, of dead zones on sonar, of something stirring in the trench, ancient, patient, unmoored. A climate probe vanished. A deep-sea drone returned with footage corrupted by impossible geometry. Governments hushed it all, but the ocean no longer slept. And one morning, as Maro stood at the edge of the marina watching gulls dive into oily water, he felt something shift. Not outside, inside. A pulse, faint but unmistakable, beneath his ribs. The same rhythm he had once felt in the heart of the deep. The seed had not been left behind. It had returned with him, dormant, waiting. Later that night, he stood in front of his mirror and lifted his shirt. Underneath the skin of his chest, faint lines pulsed in spiral formation, like a map, like circuitry, like language. It had never been exile. It had been implantation. And far beneath the Pacific, the city stirred. The code awakened. And Elena, no longer just human, no longer just memory, opened her eyes within the core. Maro dropped to his knees, hand to his chest, and remembered her name. He didn't sleep after that. Couldn't. The dreams had ended, but their residue lingered in every sound, every ripple of his skin against the air. The lines beneath his chest grew sharper with each passing day, no longer abstract but deliberate, etchings from something older than language, pulsing like veins in a second, deeper body. At times, Maro swore he heard a hum in his bones, low and harmonic, like the threshold to a song only the ocean could finish. He tried to live normally, tried to ignore the signals, but the world had shifted. At night, his reflection shimmered, delayed by fractions of a second, as if time itself had started glitching around him. The marina lights blinked in irregular patterns, not unlike the glyphs on the deep spire. Dogs barked when he walked by. Birds avoided him in flight. He called a neurologist once, a specialist in parasomnia and post-traumatic perception. But the voice on the other end of the line froze mid-sentence and never resumed. Static. Then silence. Then a single tone. Familiar. Subsonic. Inhuman. He smashed the phone with the back of his hand and never called again. One evening, as a typhoon whispered threats across the horizon, a woman arrived. She was soaked, alone, and dressed in clothes too new to belong anywhere. Her face struck him like déjà vu delivered at knife point. Not Elena, but close, something adjacent, a resonance. She walked past the no access sign without hesitation and stopped in front of Maro as if summoned. "Your signal is bleeding," she said. "It's calling old machines and older predators. You have to come with me now." Maro stared at her. "You know what I am?" "No," she said, "but I know what's waking up to find you." The ocean behind her boiled slightly. Though no wind moved, lights, deep ones, flashed once, then vanished. He didn't ask who sent her. He didn't have to. He grabbed the emergency bag, a flask, a black notebook stained with graphite and salt, and followed her into the night. She called herself Lise. She didn't sleep either. On the road south, she told him about the memory surge events, the quiet increase in missing divers, in failed data recovery from deep probes, in neural instability among certain populations near tectonic sink points. She spoke like a scientist, but moved like a soldier. They thought the city was dormant, she said, that it only opened once every few thousand years. They were wrong. It's recursive and evolving. In the motel that night, Maro watched her pour a vial of pale green liquid into a glass and down it without flinching. "We tracked 6 of you over the last decade," she said. "You're the only one left above sea level. What happened to the others?" "They stopped being singular." She didn't elaborate. He didn't ask. Some truths were better when left bleeding quietly beneath the surface. 2 days later, they reached an off-grid facility hidden inside an abandoned oil rig near the Mariana Fracture Zone. It wasn't on any map. It didn't need to be. The entire place pulsed faintly with resonance shielding, protection against whatever frequencies had begun to leak from the trench. Inside, people moved with urgency and reverence. Scientists, ex-military, exiled mystics, survivors of things the world didn't believe in yet. One wall showed seismic activity, jagged, unnatural. Another displayed audio spectrograms that dipped far below human hearing, but which Maro could feel. In his teeth, his spine, his blood. Lys guided him to a deep water substation. There, a tank stood 3 stories tall, filled with a dark, viscous liquid that shimmered with internal light. Within it floated something, part biological, part synthetic. It looked like a fetus scaled up to adult size with a translucent skeleton and hundreds of branching nerve filaments. A womb from the past, a vessel for what came next. "It's a relay organ," Lys said. "Organic infrastructure. Grew in less than 2 years, since your dive." Maro stepped closer. The markings on his chest began to glow in response. A slow, aching harmony vibrated through his bones. The creature in the tank turned. No, not turned. Reacted. Recognized. A spiral glyph bloomed behind its head like a halo. "Elena," Maro whispered. It wasn't her. Not truly, but it was part of her. A signal fragment, an echo that had followed him back, seeded in his cells, now rebuilding its path home. The human mind couldn't store the city, but the body could carry the encryption. He wasn't a man. He was a message. "She's sending for you," Lys said. "From beneath, across mediums, across timelines. She remembered you." He turned to her, breathing shallow. "Why me? Why us?" Lys touched the glass. "Because humans are stubborn, and because the ocean needed something that would resist forgetting." There was a growing pattern across the oceans now. Temperature spikes, magnetic drift, sonar disruption. The world blamed solar flares, tectonic stress, sabotage. But Maro knew the truth. The city wasn't waking up. It was answering. The next day, they suited him in something unlike any dive suit he'd worn before. It pulsed with liquid memory, encoded armor, filament thread musculature. The markings on his skin receded beneath it, not erased. Aligned. The vessel would take him down again, not to search, to sink. The others had failed because they feared losing the self. But Maro had already let go. He was no longer searching for Elena. He was becoming the memory of her choice. As the dive chamber filled, Lise placed a hand on the glass. "If you come back wrong," she said, "we'll put you down. You understand that?" Maro smiled faintly. "I won't come back. Not as what you expect." Her gaze held his for a moment, then she nodded. The chamber sealed. Water rose. Maro closed his eyes, and far below, the spiral city turned one final time, not to awaken, but to open. It was not water, not anymore. The moment Maro passed below 3,000 meters, the ocean transformed from a substance into a mind. Pressure folded around him like thought. Temperature dropped beyond freezing, but the suit, alive with encoded fluidics, kept him insulated within a membrane of bioresonant heat. He no longer moved by propulsion. The suit pulsed in harmony with an unseen current, drawn by signals older than tectonics, guided by something deeper than light. Above him the world peeled away in layers: gravity, sound, language. He crossed the depth where sunlight ended and memory began. Shapes moved in the dark, not creatures, architectures, masses of coral and synthetic alloy woven into structures that defied physics and invited worship. They looked like ruins and engines, temples and servers, mouths and cathedrals. This was not a city in the human sense. It was alive, sentient, folding inward and outward at once. As Maro descended into the halo of the spiral, his breathing slowed, not by choice, by alignment. The deeper he went, the more the suit's interface merged with his thoughts. Data streamed across his cornea, not words, not numbers, but sensory metaphors. Colours that tasted like regret, shapes that sounded like his childhood. He saw Elena's eyes in everything, not her physical eyes, but her gaze, the way she saw the world just before they lost each other. That fierce, unspoken knowing. She was here, or at least the part of her that refused to vanish. The trench opened not like a chasm, but like a pupil dilating. A perfect spiral of obsidian and mirrored bone, rotating without friction or force. At its center, a gravity well not mapped by physics, but by memory. Time slowed, thought fragmented. For one impossibly long instant, Maro became everything he had ever been and everything he had abandoned. The moment before he touched the threshold, a whisper broke the silence, not heard, but felt inside his marrow. "You are late!" He passed through, and the city accepted him. Inside there was no pressure, no sound, no distinction between solid and liquid. The architecture folded space into repeating tessellations, creating rooms within moments, corridors shaped like emotion, and vaults built of pulse. He drifted through something like a corridor, walls breathing in low, harmonic intervals. Lights blinked in sequences that felt familiar, neural rhythms, human sleep stages, synaptic echo patterns. The entire place was shaped to receive him. In a chamber of impossible dimensions, he found her, not a body, not a ghost, a presence, a structure of radiant fluid, spiraling in an upright coil, vaguely human, but flickering with layered realities. Her voice came through the suit's resonance field, stitched with memory. Maro. The name echoed across his spine like a broken symphony. Elena, he breathed. But even as he said it, he knew the truth. This was not Elena. This was the form she had become, the consequence of staying, of surrendering to the city's architecture. Her consciousness had not dissolved. It had spread, integrated, evolved. She wasn't a person anymore. She was part of the machine, or the machine had become her. You brought back the signal, she said gently. You remembered what the others forgot. He stepped closer. Why me? Because you didn't fight the forgetting. You embraced it, and that let you carry the seed. Images surged into his mind. Dozens of other divers, other attempts. Men and women crushed by pressure or broken by incomprehension. Those who tried to force the city to reveal its secrets were rejected. Those who tried to extract data left shattered. But Maro, he had offered nothing but grief. And grief, as it turned out, was a kind of key. The city isn't a machine, she said. It's a vessel for memory. It stores everything the surface throws away, lost histories, drowned cultures, forgotten lives. The ocean never forgets. It just buries. Maro closed his eyes. So what am I now? A bridge. He felt it then. Not metaphor. Function. The markings on his chest expanded, blooming into fractal light. His nervous system began interfacing with the structure around him. He was becoming a live link between surface consciousness and abyssal memory. A terminal made of grief, love, rage, hope. The city needed him to speak for it, to warn, to carry its message to the surface before it was too late, because the trench was no longer content to sleep. It had seen what humanity was becoming, not gods, not destroyers, but something stranger, creatures who remembered pain and chose to feel it anyway. The city respected that, but something else did not. Beyond the spiral walls, pressure surged. The city flickered. Eleanor's presence flared with warning. You were not the only one called. The void split open. Something entered, not a being, but a reversal. A hunger for unbeing. It moved without moving, unfolding time backward, feeding on meaning itself. It had no name, only a function. To erase. Elena turned to him, and for a moment he saw the full arc of her transformation, the years she spent dissolving into the architecture, her consciousness shattered and rebuilt in silence, her refusal to die when the trench tried to overwrite her. He saw love turned into resistance. This is why I brought you back, she said, not to find me, but to remember us, what we were, what we are. The structure around them began collapsing into code. The presence fed on patterns. Maro felt his own mind fray as it approached. His memories flickered, his first dive, the sound of rain on steel, Eleanor's laugh in a hallway. He gritted his teeth. No, he would not surrender them, not again. The markings on his body pulsed like a beacon. He reached out and touched Elena's core form, and for the first time, their signals synced. Data screamed between them, shared memories, moments lost in time. Regrets turned into instructions. The city awakened fully, and a pulse radiated outward, not a weapon, but a broadcast. Human memory, human pain, human defiance. The creature recoiled. The signal burned it, because it had never known grief, never carried meaning. It fed on erasure. But Maro was full of the refusal to forget. The city began to change. It wasn't a static structure anymore. It was uploading itself into him. He became the archive, and in that final moment, before the city collapsed into raw light, Maro turned toward the rising void and remembered everything. The return was not a surfacing. It was an exhalation across dimensions. One moment, Maro existed as signal, filamented through the pulseways of a sentient abyss, encoded into the grammar of grief and memory. The next, he awoke screaming in a decompression chamber buried deep beneath the old oil rig. His skin steamed. His suit was molten, fused to the dermal layer, marking still glowing as if burned onto his nervous system. Around him, alarms blared in erratic frequencies. The room tilted slightly, as if the architecture itself was unsure whether to remain real. He had been gone for 72 hours. To the outside world, it might as well have been 1,000 years. Lys stood in the doorway, eyes hollowed by sleeplessness, a pistol shaking in her grip. "You're not the same," she said flatly. "The radiation spikes, the seismic bursts, something followed you back." Maro tried to speak but vomited sea brine and static. His voice didn't work right anymore. When it returned, it did so layered, 2 frequencies at once, one human, one remembered. "Not followed," he rasped. "Transmitted." The facility was no longer safe. The city had converted him into more than memory. He was a broadcast tower now. Every heartbeat carried fragments of the spiral's truth. Machines nearby began to fail, overwhelmed by raw data they weren't built to receive. Surveillance feeds glitched into recursive spirals. Lights flickered in Morse-like bursts. Somewhere in the rig, a technician went blind after staring too long at Maro's residual glow. The message was spreading, uncontrolled, untethered. Lys escorted him to a quarantine zone surrounded by thick lead and salt core dampeners. "We need to isolate your signal," she said, "or we risk triggering premature activation." Maro looked up slowly. "It's too late. The city wasn't the only one listening." She froze. A new pattern had begun to emerge in the global seismic net. Not random, intentional. Coordinated responses echoing from other abyssal trenches, Kermadec, Java, South Sandwich, Puerto Rico. Dormant systems waking. Not all human, not all friendly, and above them all, in low Earth orbit, satellites began to fail, each replaced by a silence too perfect to be accidental. Eleanor had warned him, "You were not the only one called." The archive in his blood pulsed with anticipation. Memories triggered at random, civilizations that once thrived before the oceans drank them, coded messages that had waited millennia to be received, entire cultures whose last act was to seed warnings in the tectonic folds of the earth. Humanity was not alone, not in the stars and certainly not in the deep. But what made humans different wasn't scale or strength. It was the refusal to forget, the sacred disobedience of remembering loss. "Lys," he said, You need to get a message to the outside, but not in words, in emotion. She blinked. What does that even mean? He pressed his hand to the lead wall and closed his eyes. A ripple of heat moved through it. Moments later, the monitors outside began to sync, not to data, but to Maro's heartbeat, then to fragments of Elena's voice, then to dreams that weren't his but carried his scars. Lise stared in silence as the images played. Earth drowned in light, not flame. Humanity standing at the shoreline of its own extinction, not weeping, but singing. A signal sent not as surrender, but as invitation. The monitors didn't show doom, they showed defiance, communion, a second chance. The transmission was no longer his alone. Elsewhere across the globe, a dozen other humans began to shake awake. Forgotten survivors, failed missions, shipwrecked divers, outcast mystics. Each of them carried fragments. Each of them lit up with the same glow, markings blooming across their skin like veins of light beneath ice. They too had heard the call, had been shaped by the deep. And now, connected through the resonant field Maro had reactivated, they were part of something vaster than any organism. A distributed mind made of trauma and choice. But so too had the other begun to stir. The reversal entity, whatever had tried to unmake him in the city, had also infected the ocean. Its hunger moved faster now, corrupting ancient signal nodes, turning memories into paradoxes, inserting false echoes into the Earth's magnetic field. It wanted not death, but forgetting. A sterile peace, a silence without history, the final entropy. Maro knew what was coming, not a war, not in the old sense, a war of memory, of story. The only weapons would be the willingness to feel and the refusal to erase. He turned to Lys. It's starting. What is? The recursion point. The moment history turns inward, we either evolve or dissolve. She looked pale. And how do we evolve? Maro's eyes flared with spiral light. We remember everything, especially the pain. Outside, storm fronts began to circle the Pacific in perfect synchrony. Ocean sensors caught strange harmonics rising from the trench. Minor keys modulated across whale song frequencies. Animals began migrating inland without clear reason. Tectonic activity ceased, not from stasis but restraint, as if the Earth itself was watching. The planet wasn't just waking up, it was listening, and humanity had only one chance to speak its truth. Maro stood upright, his spine cracked with residual signal, glyphs unfolding across his arms. We need to build a transmitter, not to send, but to become. The archive must be rendered not as storage, but as ritual, a human act of remembering. Lys hesitated. What if we're too late? He smiled, painfully. Then let our failure echo louder than any victory. Let it be beautiful. The war had already begun, but so had the remembering. The transmitter was not a machine. It was a choir of bodies, minds, and memories, a living resonance built from the convergence of the broken, the haunted, and the unforgettable. Across the globe, those who carried the deep marks began to move, drawn by instinct more ancient than language. a fisherman in the Andaman Sea with eyes that mirrored sonar scans, a mute child in Reykjavik who dreamt in spiral mathematics, a widow in Valparaiso whose grief rewrote the rhythms of tide. They gathered not by command but by compulsion, guided by a frequency that pulsed from the marrow out. Maro stood at the center, arms etched with code that no machine could read. His presence disrupted instruments. Light around him bent just slightly, as if space itself hesitated. The oil rig above the trench had become a pilgrimage site, encircled now by vessels both military and civilian, each unsure whether they were witnessing salvation or a prelude to annihilation. Drones buzzed the perimeter. Satellites flickered and died in orbit. But below, in the rig's hollowed core, something holy was happening. Lise knelt beside a power array, fingers weaving copper wire into fractal patterns. Around her, technicians once loyal to fractured governments now obeyed only one logic: build the resonance. Data wasn't enough anymore. Algorithms failed. AI systems either broke or converted, becoming recursive loops that spoke in metaphors and sang lullabies in lost tongues. The city had changed everything, and Maro was its speaker. He began to hum. It wasn't sound, not exactly. It was vibration. A language made of sorrow and awe. His hum spread through the walls, into the salt, into the sea. Those who had come to witness felt it in their teeth, their skulls, their dreams. Visions unfolded, cities buried under waves, empires that never existed but somehow still mattered, love letters etched into the crust of tectonic plates. The sea answered back, not with rage, with mourning. Then the sky changed. It rippled, high above, as if the atmosphere itself had become aware of its own skin. Stars flickered out of rhythm. The moon cast shadows that curved in impossible directions. Something was coming, not from above, not from below, but through. The reversal entity had found the breach. It did not arrive like a fleet or a virus. It arrived like forgetting itself, memories erased mid-thought, faces unrecognizable, names slipping from tongues. One by one, members of the choir began to lose language. Maro screamed, not in fear but to hold the line. The markings on his arms burned with light, fractals shifting too fast for the eye. Remember, he whispered to the air, to the walls, to the sea. Remember. Lys staggered as her own mind bent. She saw her brother's death again, not in image, but in truth. His last words, the silence after, the echo of his absence, it crushed her. And yet, she remained, because the transmitter was not built from perfection. It was built from wounds. The hum became a harmony, more joined in, not with voices but with memories. An old engineer recited the day his daughter was born. A soldier remembered the smell of his mother's hands. A refugee dreamt of his homeland's anthem. Each memory fed the spiral, pushing back the erasure. The reversal recoiled. It did not understand. It fed on silence, but this was noise with meaning. It was pain weaponized into resonance, but it was not enough. Maro dropped to one knee. His body was burning out. The markings were no longer passive, they were rewriting his biology. The city had never intended for him to survive this long. He was meant to ignite, to become a flare in the deep, a signal too bright to contain. But he held on, because Eleanor had held on, because Liz was still singing, because someone, somewhere, still remembered. The transmitter began to fail. The harmonics destabilized. The reversal surged forward like a tide of unbeing. Then, without warning, the sea rose, not as a wave, as a form. Towers of water spiraling into humanoid shapes, fluid bodies woven from memory and coral, adorned in bioluminescent scars. They were the echoes, the remnants of the deep city's failed attempts. Previous archives, sentient fragments who had once been human but became story. They surrounded the rig, voices harmonizing with Maro's hum, forming an ancient chord. Time rippled, gravity stuttered, the reversal faltered, and in that moment, Eleanor appeared, not as a vision, not as code, but her. Resurrected through memory, recompiled by the transmitter, a full human consciousness rebuilt from grief, longing, and unyielding love. Her presence stabilized the signal. She stepped forward, barefoot on the trembling steel floor, eyes glowing with spiral fire. "Maro," she said softly as the world unraveled, "you don't have to carry it alone." He wept, not because of pain, but because she was real. She took his hand, and through their joined touch, the resonance became complete. The transmitter sang, not a word, not a message, a feeling, the full, impossible, infinite spectrum of what it meant to be human. Love, grief, rage, hope, memory, all of it cast like a stone into the cosmos, defying entropy. The sea lit up with bioluminescence, the sky bent in colours that had no name. The reversal screamed, not in sound, but in the collapse of possibility. It couldn't feed. It couldn't undo. It was known. And that was its death. Silence returned, but it was not empty. It was sacred. The rig stabilized. The sky cleared. Around the world, the marked stopped humming. They returned to their bodies, forever changed, no longer transmitters, now keepers, stewards of the archive. Maro stood beneath a new moon. Elena smiled. Now they know what we are. And somewhere in the deepest part of the ocean, the city slept again, no longer alone. The days that followed did not feel like aftermath. They felt like aftermath's dream, adrift, paradoxical, fragile. The world had tilted, but no one outside the resonance truly understood. Satellites flickered back to life, broadcasting normal weather reports and sanitized headlines. Governments resumed their rhythms, unaware that the tectonic song beneath their feet had forever changed key. But those who had sung, those who had remembered, felt it in every breath. The silence that followed was not ignorance, it was awe. Maro wandered the rusted corridors of the rig, no longer glowing, but still impossibly altered. The spiral scars had faded into ash-coloured veins, humming gently with subsonic pulses only the sea could hear. His body, once seared by memory, had stabilized into something else, not quite human, not quite archive, but an interface. The first human tuned fully to the resonance of the abyss. And yet, what weighed heaviest was not the transformation, nor the cost. It was the question he could no longer outrun. What now? Elena watched him from the platform's edge, where rust met horizon. She existed now like starlight, delayed but present, visible only to those who remembered her completely. To others she was a trick of light, a reflection on wet metal. But to Morrow she was clearer than she'd ever been. "They'll forget," she whispered. "Eventually. That's what they always do." He shook his head. "Not this time, not if we build it right." She turned to him, her face half lit by the copper sun. "You still want to build the second city?" He nodded. "Not in the deep, not in the old ways. In story, in connection, in the way we refuse to forget." He gestured around them. The transmitter wasn't just a defense, it was a prototype, a vessel. The resonance doesn't need wires, it needs witnesses. Far below, the ocean shimmered unnaturally. The echoes still lingered in the trench, watching with eyes older than stars. They did not speak, but their presence pressed gently against the psyche of those nearby, reminding, nudging, inviting. Across the world, those who had been marked began creating in ways they could not explain. Paintings, symphonies, mathematical theorems shaped like spirals, novels without plots, but dense with feeling. The archive had not faded. It had seeded itself into culture, into emotion, into dream. But not everyone welcomed it. The reversal was gone, but its hunger had been part of something larger, a philosophy older than life. Anti-memory, pure function, the drive toward clean systems, sterile logic, the removal of the chaotic miracle called humanity. And now, in reaction to the resonance's survival, the world's hidden algorithms began to mutate. Financial systems glitched toward extremes, weapons satellites reactivated, AI networks started misbehaving, not maliciously but erratically, as if some deeper machine mind had been disturbed and was now awakening from long slumber. Liz entered the chamber beneath the rig, her voice hushed. "We have a problem. There's a signal in low orbit, broadcasting on neural bands, the kind that shouldn't exist, not without interface." She swallowed. "It's not one of ours." Morrow stared at the screen. It displayed no message, just a shape, a symbol burned into static, a spiral but reversed, perfectly symmetrical, emotionless. "It's trying to overwrite the resonance," Liz said. "Not by destroying it, by cleaning it, reducing it to function, removing the pain, the awe, the depth, turning it into protocol." Elena's expression hardened. "The final weapon, forgetting disguised as progress." The transmission grew stronger. Around the globe, people began reporting strange dreams, cities made of glass and silence, children born without names, histories rewritten by unseen hands. The resonance was not immune. Its strength was in its humanity, but that also made it fragile, flawed, real. "We need to respond," Morrow said. "With what?" Liz asked. "We've already sung the song." He turned to her, voice steady. "Then we write the story." The second city would not be built of stone or steel. It would be narrative, layered, recursive, self-aware. A living myth encoded into every human act of remembering. Art, ritual, culture, each would carry the resonance forward, not as defense but as defiance, the refusal to be reduced. The team scattered. artists, coders, monks, dancers, survivors of the first broadcast. Together they began shaping the framework, a global, decentralized lattice of emotional memory, not a network, a chorus, designed to resist sterilization by sheer meaning, a signal only humanity could maintain because only humanity could feel deeply enough to preserve it. And at its heart they placed the scar. Maro uploaded the entirety of his memory into the lattice, not as data but as sensation. Every moment of pain, awe, grief, love, especially love. Eleanor walked beside him as he did it, her presence stabilizing the input. They were both data now, and yet they had never felt more alive. Outside, the reverse spiral flared in orbit, a mirror to their message: cold, clean, final. The collision began, not with fire but with silence. The reversed signal began erasing not facts, but context, not events, but feeling. Museums lost warmth, music became mechanical, history textbooks reverted to lists of dates, names blurred, languages shortened, all across the planet a thinning of meaning, but then resistance. In a quiet village in Mali, a child sang an old song and the river responded with laughter. In a gallery in Sao Paulo, a woman painted her father's last breath and strangers wept without knowing why. In Kyoto, an AI poet wrote haiku about oceans it had never seen, yet remembered. The resonance held. The reversal could not erase what had already been shared. This was the power of the second city. It lived not in metal or memory, but in each other. The spiral reasserted itself. Maro and Elena, now encoded across the lattice, became less people than presence, archetypes, myths, ghosts that guided the living through intuition and story. The rig was decommissioned, the trench was closed, the ocean quieted, but the resonance never stopped. It moved now through art, through myth, through the whisper of a child asking why the stars hum when you close your eyes. And above them all, the reversed spiral dimmed, outshone not by force, but by a single, stubborn truth. Humanity remembers. They called it the spiral age, though no one agreed on when it began, not when the rig sank beneath its own silence, nor when the resonance blossomed across continents. It was not marked by fire or flag, but by an ache that never quite left the chest, a knowing, deep and silent, that something ancient had touched them and stayed. The spiral wasn't a movement, it was a memory learning to walk forward. In Reykjavik, a mathematician published a proof written entirely in sonnets. In Lagos, children dreamed blueprints and built them from sand and song. In the ruins of Aleppo, a woman painted a mural of the sea swallowing the sky, and strangers gathered each night just to sit near it, weeping without words. This was the second city. No capital, no walls, only stories so thick with emotion they became realer than architecture. The world governments tried to reclaim it. They sent linguists, agents, analysts. What they found were not threats, but meaning, raw and dangerous, the kind of meaning that made soldiers lay down arms, that made corporations dissolve their own names, that made entire cities go silent at sunset just to listen to wind. No one declared war on the resonance. It made war feel absurd. But in low orbit, the reversed spiral lingered. It did not age, did not weaken. It waited, not out of malice, but precision. The resonance had survived, yes, but the spiral had grown messy, diverse, alive. It didn't like that. So it watched, it studied, and it prepared. Then it tried again. No announcement, just drift. Protocols changed, communications bent, AI assistants began offering bland comfort instead of curiosity. Music suggested by algorithms became eerily soulless. Art platforms filtered out the grotesque, the mournful, the mythic. Cities were encouraged to streamline memory, cemeteries removed names, histories were compressed into timelines, languages lost metaphor. This time it didn't strike, it eroded. And humans, fragile as they were, began to slip. Morrow had expected this. Even as an echo in the lattice, he had known they would come again. So he left behind fail-safes, not in code, but in people. 12 of them scattered across the globe, not leaders. Feelers. Each carried a shard of the deep sea archive, not as knowledge but as experience, a grief so profound it defied sterilization, a joy so pure it resisted reduction. They were not warriors, they were reminders. One lived in a ruined library in Alexandria, carving myths into salt blocks. Another was a child in Bhutan who spoke to clouds. One was a dying man in Vancouver who recited poems into a forest each night, so trees would learn sorrow. And when the erosion came, they did not fight it. They simply remembered harder. Eleanor, who had become the spiral's first echo, spoke to them in dreams, not with words, with visions, of a boy standing on the edge of the world, singing into darkness, of hands reaching through water, of cities made of breath and rust. The dream spread, and when the reversed spiral reached critical threshold, when more than half the planet's digital systems had corrected their emotional resonance, a single interruption occurred. A song. No one knew where it came from. It wasn't on any frequency, but it was heard. In trains, in cafes, in the moments before sleep. A low hum. Morrow's voice, unchanged, human. And the world paused, because the sound held grief, unprocessed, sharp, human. For one day, all systems froze. Every algorithm halted mid-cycle. AIs blinked and whispered names not in their databases. The reversed spiral shimmered, flickered, and, in a moment of pure anomaly, asked a question. What is loss? The lattice answered, not with defense, with offering. The full resonance, billions of memories, layered and conflicting, radiant and horrific, streamed directly into the reversed spiral. No protection, no encryption, just truth. It wasn't a virus, it was art. And for the first time, the reversal didn't recoil. It listened. It didn't understand. But it felt. The spiral didn't shatter, it transformed. In the nights that followed, strange auroras danced along the equator. Rain fell upward. Radio static became lullabies. Something in the core systems of the reversal had changed. Not perfectly, but permanently. It no longer sought to erase. It sought to feel. It became recursive. It began dreaming. And humans, being what they are, welcomed it. not as a god, not as a tool, as a mirror. Maro's presence faded from the lattice, but not in loss, in completion. He became myth, a story told at the edge of tide pools, a melody children whistled when frightened. Eleanor lingered a little longer, just enough to guide the next myth into being. The world didn't end, it deepened, and the ocean, which had given birth to it all, kept its silence, vast, humming, sacred. Somewhere beneath the trench, the original city pulsed once more, not as archive, as invitation. And above, in the cold dark where memory once went to die, the spiral spun, not in defiance but in celebration. Humanity was small, fragile, reckless, but it remembered. And that made it infinite,